Welcome to episode 3 of the St. George's Movie of the Week. This week we have a special cast of very important guest stars. We have Jamie Tender, head of school at St. George's, and Francesca Mulazzi, head of the upper school. And we are going to talk Godfather, one of the 3 or 4 greatest films of all time. To get started, Dave's going to kick us off. First of all, thanks so much, Jamie and Francesca, for being here. Dave, could you give us a little historical context on The Godfather?
You bet. Yeah, and thank you to our guests for being here. So The Godfather was released in 1972. It's based on a book by the same name. The film was directed by Francis Ford Coppola. It's an early role for Al Pacino, who almost didn't get the part. We might talk about that later. It was mostly filmed in New York. Apparently they had some trouble because some of the local mafia didn't necessarily like the fact that they were making this movie. And then part of it was actually filmed in Sicily too. And it was a success. It was the highest grossing film of the year. Theaters actually raised their prices like $1 in 1972 in New York because so many people wanted to see it. They increased the number of screenings per day as well. And it won Best Picture, Best Screenplay, and Best Actor for Marlon Brando. Many other people were nominated. And so to give you some of the historical context around 1972, the war in Vietnam was going poorly. Pentagon Papers, which basically revealed the government had been lying, were released earlier. Nixon was running for re-election in 1972. Democratic Party was still in disarray after the debacle of 1968. And the economy was like slowly weakening through the 70s. And so it's like generally a time of chaos in like American society. MLK and RFK had been assassinated several years before. You had riots in cities. And so, yeah, that's the general context for the release of The Godfather in 1972.
All right. Thank you. We'd like to get kicked off by talking about some favorite scenes from the movie. Francesca, did you have a favorite scene?
Well, I think we would be remiss if we didn't actually talk about the opening scene of the movie. So, Amerigo Buonasera. So, Amerigo is actually a common Italian name, which, translates to, which is after Amerigo Vespucci, one of the first Italian explorers actually to come to the United States. So I think it's a clever play that the character's name is Amerigo. And he first starts the entire movie, 2 hours and 37 minutes of it, by saying, "I believe in America." And, kind of like what Holte is saying, that it's a unique moment in time. I think in some ways, the movie is a tribute to the American dream and the haves and the have-nots, or the I don't have it yet, but I can get it. And so the story is, I believe, an introduction to American immigrants coming to the United States and many other immigrants. And so it's my favorite scene because it sets up the Don and the power of the family, this dark office and actually the man who's coming to ask for a favor is an undertaker. He's a funeral director, and he's asking for a favor, like he's asking for life from the Don. And I love how he first starts speaking in Italian and then switches into English as if to say, like, now we're here in America. And I just love the dark, quiet, calm power. And Amerigo describes how he went to the police first when his daughter was mistreated, abused by some men, attempted rape, I think. And so then the Don asks him why he didn't come to him first. And Amerigo describes the 2 systems in America, the governmental system, police, and then this other system that exists, which is, Don Corleone's family and the tradition and the old school. And so in some ways he's saying, I want to be a part of this America, but I still need this old cultural tradition. And I think it sets up the movie amazingly when you see that there's these 2 things at play, the tradition versus America and the changing times. I love that scene.
I agree. One of the things I like about that scene is that, or I guess the whole film, is that there's the setup about when they're going to become legitimate. When's the family going to be legitimate? And it gets to be more of a deal as you go through the trilogy But there's a really fine line between legitimate and illegitimate or gangster. In the film, it's like they're aspiring to be, politicians, but the politicians that they know have corrupt cops like McCluskey in their pocket. So it's, it's very, very faint distinction. I know that Dave was talking about liking the bracketing of the end of the movie and how it concludes in the same dark office, but with a different dawn. Did you want to say anything about that, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. That first scene is great. And just sort of the slow, steady shots early on before they like finally cut to Vito. But yeah, I really like a number of scenes in the film, but I thought the last one is a good one to talk about since we spoke about the beginning. And primarily for the way like Michael has this confrontation with his sister Connie, and then Kay comes in. And she basically demands that he, tell her about his business this one time, and he kind of, accepts. But the really great part of that scene is sort of the final shot where she's like initially relieved when he tells her that he had nothing to do with the death of Carlo, and she goes out to fix them.
Which is a total lie.
Which is a total lie, right? Which on its own, right, it tells us a lot about Michael, like, and we'll get to this later, but he's willing to commit extreme acts of violence in the scenes before, and then at the end of the movie, right, he's willing to lie to his wife about what he is doing. And it ends with that shutting of the door where she's sort of looking in, and she realizes that, like, although she is like part of his family, she's like never really going to be like part of that family. And I just thought it was really neat how, like, the opening scene, you have the scene in the office, but you have the wedding going on outside, and sort of these two separate worlds for like Vito at that time. And you see Michael like establishing those like two separate worlds when he like officially becomes the Don in that final scene. So I thought they worked well together, and it was cool how he did that both at the beginning and end of the movie.
Jamie, favorite?
I was just going to say, the other part of that is I think the progression of Michael into that role, from being sheltered at the very beginning, kind of being the war hero, and not like even the tolerance of him not being available for the initial staging of the wedding picture. And they call everything off. And, through the movie, you hear about how they don't want him involved in the family business. Later, the aspirations are revealed that they want him to be the senator. And, again, back to the legitimacy of the family. And when he goes all in, I mean, it's really the recognition and realization that the family is stronger than that. And there's references to that throughout. Don't ever speak against the family, don't, all these things. And then for him to come kind of to that full circle of being in control and having that quiet power that his father showed that Sonny obviously didn't. But those were some of the things that I was watching for as well during the film. And then also thinking in terms of the leadership styles. I know we were going to throw some aspects of that into this review. And I thought that was interesting, just perspective going throughout the movie with the different characters and their leadership styles, what worked, what didn't, and some of those things. So I agree. I thought those were two opening scenes, and I reflect more on them now that they've been brought up in this podcast.
One thing I always wonder when I'm thinking about Michael versus Vito is Michael seems like a much more bloodthirsty and dangerous sort of Don. And, Connie at the end says that, she says, Dad would have never killed Carlo. You shouldn't have done it. And so when Don Corleone says, I never wanted this for you, I always wonder if he didn't want it for Michael because he suspected that Michael was too dangerous for it. I don't know what other people think about that. But
so in Italian, in a few times throughout the movie, and in that final scene that Vito and Michael have together, he says he wants him to be a pezzo novante, and in Italian that means like a pezzo is like a handgun, and a novanta is the 90. It's like a 90 caliber. He wants him to be a big shot. But his idea of a big shot was going to be Senator Corleone or President Corleone, so he could hold the strings, right? So he thought maybe that ambitious power could, or that type of thirst for blood, as it turned out to be, but a thirst for to be a strong leader was going to take a different direction. You know, he wanted him to be the legitimate pezzo novante who could pull the puppet strings from a different perspective. I just think that's brilliant as well. But, you know, when he comes back, and this also, I wondered, even though it was made in 1972, when that first scene was supposed to be, you know, because he's just come back from World War II. He's a war hero and everything. And, you know, they talk about being in New Hampshire and he's the college boy. I wonder if he went to Dartmouth. You know, they said he's Ivy League. And so I wondered when it really took place, 46 or 47.
All the cars had 45 on the license plate.
Oh, did they? Okay.
Good eye. Nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
But wait, so going back to that final scene though, the baptism and like,
Oh, right. Yeah.
and Michael Corleone like emerging as a leader, it's like this baptism of blood. I mean, he killed those McCloskey and I forget the name of the guy that he shot in the restaurant. But when he killed all of those guys in the interwoven scenes between the baptism, and right when the priest is baptizing, he says, "And you denounce Lucifer," and that's basically when Michael becomes like he's totally flipped. He's going to lie to his wife. He's going to kill his sister's husband. Just all of the evil deeds just are now opened.
Right. For sure.
Yeah, no.
Mentioning the editing in that scene earlier to me.
Yeah. Oh, you want to talk about the editing?
No, go for it.
Okay. Yeah, no, the editing, I agree, is like incredible. I think they call it parallel editing. And I guess when they were originally planning that, they were just going to have it be sort of linear like the rest of the film. The original plan wasn't to kind of splice it together like that. And so that's all something that like happened in the process of editing, and like it does just build the tension, right? Because you've got like the music from the church, you have them like with Connie's kid, right, going through like the ceremony of the baptism with the holy water. You see the guy getting like shaved, and you see them like putting on clothes. So even like the action in each of those is like a little similar, and they add meaning to each other, right? Like obviously Michael is responsible for all of it. It's never like said that he is at that point, but just the way it is cut together, it implies all of it. And as you said, like the lengths that he is willing to go to remain in charge, and also to like legitimize himself, right, through the process of the baptism. So yeah, just a great scene. And it's hard to imagine what it would look like if those were two scenes, one after the other. It wouldn't have the same effect.
No, wouldn't have the same effect. It just keeps showing you the hypocrisy of the church scene.
I thought the other thing, Chad, were you going to add something to the editing?
No, not really. No, go for it.
Well, I just thought it was interesting. The other part that actually led to even more of the buildup is when Michael had his plan in his mind, and he specifically said, "We'll wait until the baptism." And you didn't know, like, you kind of thought he was walking into a trap, or at least I did, and what that really meant. And then you actually wait for the baptism, then that comes on, and you're just waiting to see, all right, let's get through the baptism and let's see what happens. And
right.
I just thought it was powerful, and
right,
especially going through baptisms, and you have to speak as the Godfather for the child to denounce their sins, and at the same time lying about your own. So that was great.
No, the transformation is complete for sure.
Yeah.
And it's a grim scene. And also, fantastic. I love it.
Fantastic.
Yeah. All right. Should we go to the mailbag, see if we have any
Chad, did you want to talk about your favorite scene?
The only scene that I'd probably bring up is actually maybe a counterpoint to the baptism scene, which is the first scene of violence in the movie, and that's the horse's head in Kenneth Waltz's bed. And that's an interesting scene. It feels, it's just a horse, right? But it feels more justified than the baptism scene. It's Don Corleone, and it's terrifying, but it's also like the guy is a racist, and he's saying all these terrible things, and he's inflexible, and he's rude to Tom Hagen. But as the final scene, the baptism scene, is all those cuts against one another. That's one continuous, pretty famous crane shot in the bedroom. I was checking today, and he wakes up. There's the shots outside. He wakes up, and then slowly the camera comes across the room, and then there's no cut until he starts screaming. And then every time he screams, they edit it in sync with his screaming. But that, is interesting because it's so slow and methodical, whereas there's the quick parallel cuts that Dave was talking about, I think, in the baptism scene. So I like that scene, but I like tons of them. I mean, my favorite is probably when Michael kills Sollozzo and McCluskey. The drama in that scene is fantastic.
And his eyes, like, you can just see he's basically deciding, like, there's going to always be before this moment and after this moment. He's sitting there, and you can feel the tension rising, and you can see in his face, like, he's thinking about what he's going to do, right? Like,
right. There's some unsubtitled Italian in there too, for those of us that don't speak Italian, and I always notice it because part of it is subtitled, but then part of it they're just talking, and I don't get to be in on the conversation.
Yeah.
Which I also think is cool. So
yeah, because it makes you realize that there's an other world, right? That has a set of rules and understandings that you might not be a part of or understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it.
The other part of that horse head scene, though, going back to that I was actually thinking about that this morning. The power of that went into that. I mean, to a guy that thought he was untouchable and he's not going to be influenced, and then Johnny Fontane ends up in his movie.
Right.
But to be able to kill the horse, amputate its head, put it in the bed while the guy's sleeping.
I know.
And you wake up that way, and
you don't know whose blood it is.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah. I think they also referenced that in Animal House. An ode to the Godfather, so I recalled that immediately. So
right, yeah.
Hey,
Watching the guy go for it.
Fun fact about the horse: in all the rehearsals, they used a fake horse's head, and then in the actual real scene, that was a real horse's head. And
no way.
They say that was one of the reasons that his screams were so real, was because it was actual blood and an actual horse's head.
Wow.
That would do it.
That would do it for me. Yeah. I think there's like a clever, and so this like foreshadows Michael's intelligence or his cunning, or even like the Machiavellian, to Jamie's point about like what type of leader he is. It's like, I mean, that is getting so deep into what someone cares about to hurt them in such a powerful way, like killing him wouldn't do it. It's like getting to someone, you really have to start thinking about what they believe and value, and to get someone so deep.
Right.
I wondered about the timing of that. How fast did that happen from when Tom Hagen left? Because that says something about Tom too. I mean, he picked up quickly on what was so important and how to hurt this guy and make a point. And it almost seemed like he walked out, said, he doesn't ask for a second favor. And like the next morning he's waking up with worse. And
yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It's right after, because we see Tom in a later scene, like he just got back to New York.
Right.
That's true.
Right. So it's like immediately afterwards. And I do like how Tom is just like so calm and unflappable in all the scenes with Waltz, which just kind of then I think adds to the dramatic effect of the horse head. So
right. Yeah, you kind of think that Waltz might have got away with it.
Yeah.
You kind of think, it's going to take them some time to figure out what to do. And then the next morning.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
I thought the Tom Hagen character was pretty interesting because he shows that kind of calmness throughout the movie, except when he gets exasperated with Sonny and his inability to control his temper. But even when, like Tessio, I was talking about that being one of my other favorite scenes, when he's revealed as the traitor and basically says it's not personal, it's just business, and asks Tom if there's anything he can do to get him out, and he said, no, I'm afraid I can't, and walks off. And just, he saw it as business as well. But with Sonny, it was personal. And back and forth, when they got into arguments, it was personal. You're not a good war conciliatory or
conciliary.
Thanks. I don't have the language.
Yeah, the cool leadership style. I'd be curious what you guys think of the different leadership mannerisms of some of these guys.
I mean, I think that Don Corleone has sort of built a family and has got a sort of, he's violent, but at the same time he has all these political connections that he's worked carefully to cultivate. He's polite when he declines Sollozzo's offer at the beginning. He's like super nice about it. He's just like, let's have a drink and, you can be on your way. And I don't think that Michael is involved in any of that. I don't think that he cultivates any of those relationships. He just sort of falls into it, which means that he doesn't value them. So it's very easy for him to just execute all the competition. So, I mean, I think that the movie is nostalgic for the sort of leadership of Vito by the end, and certainly by the end of the trilogy, I think it is. But I could easily be wrong. Are there other thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with that. I mean, Michael is very much concerned with like respect and favors, but it just seems much more emphasized with Vito, right? Where he sort of is upset when when Amerigo offers to, or Buonasera, right, offers to pay him for having these people murdered. Like he sort of says, that's not how we do business. And I agree with Chad's point too about like Michael seems a little more abrupt at times, and I think with the way he sort of pushes Tom to the side, eventually, like there's not really like an explanation. It's just sort of like, you're out, Tom. Not that Tom's like not going to remain loyal, but like that just seems a little more abrupt. And it's actually Don Corleone who has to like sit down with Tom and like kind of like talk him through the process a little bit. So I think that's a good contrast of sort of how they think about leadership. But.
We also don't know Don in this movie at this point what Don Corleone Vito has done to get to that leadership position. Another little fun fact is like what's up with Marlon Brando's jaw in this movie, right? And apparently for the casting, when he tried out for the part, he rolled up some paper towel in his mouth so that his mouth would look like that because he wanted to look like a bulldog. So he didn't use the rolled up paper in the movie. They made a special implant that he put in there, like plastic piece to make his jowls look like that so that he looked like a bulldog. And I think it's also worth noting that he's not a small man. He's tall. He's like Jamie. He's towering. Michael is actually quite short. He's got a small stature. And I wonder if there's something in Michael that is like the small man complex. And how did Vito get to be where he is? Maybe he had his heyday of serious violence because he's not a small man.
No.
Maybe he was the muscle at some point.
Right.
I got a question. It's a little off topic of what we were just talking about, but Francesca reminded me of this when they were talking about just his appearance and, however his jaws are. But Michael, what's the significance and that he had a scar? I know he got his jaw broke by McCluskey, but he always had, at least on my TV screen, it looked like there was a discoloring under his eye. He was in Sicily for 2 years, And that's remained until he came back. And then they commented that the doctor did good work or something, like they removed something. Did you guys notice that, or is there any significance?
I noticed it, and I wasn't sure, because like you do see it in Sicily, and I wasn't sure if it was just like leftover bruising from like being punched by McCluskey, like in addition to having his jaw broken, like he also had a bruise here, like, and that meant like some of the scenes in Sicily, like when he meets Apollonia, happen actually really quickly after he gets there. So I kind of wondered if they were using it to signal that that happened early in his time in Sicily as opposed to later, but I'm not sure. That's just my guess.
He has a handkerchief for a while. He's weeping. He's weeping out of that one eye for a while too.
Yeah,
Okay.
he had the towel to, yeah. Anyhow.
Jamie, I was curious if you had any thoughts about like leadership and how it works in the movie.
Yeah, I was thinking, I mean, looking at the leaders as they emerged and as you see them, the quiet, thoughtful power. You don't always know what's happening. You know there's great respect there. They don't raise their voice in confrontation at any time. You had mentioned, you know, even the decline is nice, but even when Michael was, you know, brewing from, you know, his brother being killed and recognizing when Carlo basically admits it, there's never any true anger shown. The lip quivering a little bit in the restaurant when he kills McCluskey and the other guy, but it's really, even at the hospital when he's getting beat up, he doesn't, like, there's not a violent outburst from him. So it's always controlled and tempered. It comes out in other ways. And that's the thing that I noticed for the ones that ended up being successful. You know, all the guys that were loud and obnoxious and violent that showed it, they kind of got killed. So it worked against them. But there is that quiet power. And I think in one of the emails that I sent, they also recognize the importance of basically the mob wars every 5 to 10 years. It says it happens.
Go into the mattresses.
Yeah, and it seemed to like clean out all the bad actors, and that's a part of it, and it has to happen. And there's almost a recognition that that's part of the life that they're in, and, you know, get ready for it. I think that's the other part why Tom was sent away. He wasn't good in the war time, and that was foreshadowing, because that was before, I think, the baptism scene, as I recall, when he's kind of disseminating everybody, and you're going to do this, you're going to do this, and you're not ready for a war, basically, is what he said. But calm, and so that was my take on it.
Yeah.
Well, we're under 10 minutes, and this thing cuts off sort of abruptly, so, you know, we'll see how we do. But the question that I had to sort of conclude it and maybe circle back to some of what we were talking about at the beginning is, where does the movie sort of fall? So I was reading that traditional gangster movies before The Godfather, they would feature a person who was like an outsider or an outlaw, and, you know, they would rise up through the ranks and become a gangster and then become powerful, but then be destroyed, so that the audience could sort of vicariously enjoy, you know, the experience of, you know, fighting your way up through the system, but then also like return to a moral place where they were like, well, I'm still a good person because I'm glad that guy, you know, I'm glad James Cagney was, you know, was caught or killed. But The Godfather is different in that they've already arrived and they're already in power. And so the audience, and they're not destroyed, so the audience doesn't get to sort of enjoy the fact that they're the moral people leaving the, you know, they've been rooting for the Corleones for the whole movie. So how do we think that the film sort of reconciles questions of America and capitalism and, you know, where are its sympathies and what do we think about it? That's sort of my question.
I mean, I'll jump in first. I mean, I do like, I agree, it's about the American dream, and I think the opening part clearly sort of signifies that. Some of the stuff I was reading, maybe it was the same article, is like, this is not about like a pursuit of the material American dream, because like the Corleone family like already has it, but it's like this attempt to gain like moral legitimacy throughout the film, right? Whether it's like through the church, whether it's through like actual family, maybe through politics. And so and like Michael, like over the course of the trilogy, right, continues to struggle with that issue. And so like, I guess that is mostly to sort of add on to your point. Like, this is very different than a lot of other stories about the American dream, where it's just about like achieving the economic success of it. So I don't know, what do other people think?
I guess my thought is like the mobster lifestyle is so romanticized in this, especially, and it's such kind of an unknown. So I think when people from the outside or have no interaction with it and just hear about it and talk about it, I think it's just another cultural component of what's true and what's not. You know, you think about John Gotti when we were, you know, kids, and his downfall, and you hear the names, they sound Italian, but you don't know really what's true and to what extent. So I don't know in terms of the American dream what it says, but I do think there's a fascination with all that you don't know, and you want a glimpse inside of it. And I think that's what, even setting them up as the people that you're rooting for throughout, as bad as they are, but they're better than the other 5 families that you don't really get to know very well, but you get relationships with these folks. So that would be my take on it.
I think ultimately, if the story of America, if this movie emulates, you know, the story of America, it is violent, and there are people who come out on top and others that are taken advantage of, or, you know, like there was a time in America when Italians were discriminated against, you know, like if you think of the Sacco and Vanzetti trials, and even, you know, like the darker skinned Southern Italians who, you know, there was slang of calling them like black, basically. And that was a way of differentiating them from like the white Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, more white kind of Irish or German immigrants in the East Coast at that time period. And so in some ways, like becoming legitimate, they want to be white, or they want to be American, and not, you know, because the original settlers, it was all like British and more, not like swarthy Southern Italians. And so like coming through that, the movie is incredibly racist too. Some of the comments in it and the things that they say. And I just think it's like one people's struggle to get above others, you know, in legitimacy or power, and through violence. I also read that when Marlon Brando, he was awarded an Academy Award for Best Actor for The Godfather, and he actually didn't accept the award. A Native American woman accepted it on his behalf and said at the Oscars that he is like basically refusing to accept this, and he wants to call attention to violence against Native Americans in the United States. And I'd never heard that before I read it today, but it just makes me think also about race and color wars in America. You know, that is one of the stories of America, unfortunately.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts? I'd just like to, we're under our 2 minutes, and
I do have one final thought.
All right.
One of my questions when I look at old movies, I think, does this movie stand the test of time? And looking through this movie with my lens right now, I think, okay, there are like few female speaking parts. Michael yells at his sister. She's hysterical. They lie to women. They basically are cooking and having babies and holding crying babies. And the movie is a story of men. And I appreciate it a little bit less watching it now than I did years ago.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that
discussed actually when we were sort of picking it.
But it's a classic.
It's a classic, and I do think it stands the test of time. And I suppose there's some. Yeah, I think that you're right. All right, we are under a minute. Thank you so much, Jamie and Francesca, for joining.
Thank you.
It was a fantastic conversation. I loved it.
Thank you.
Francesca got us some cannoli, so I'm going to go eat it. Delicious.
Thank you.
Jamie's got the cannoli. Nice.
Yeah, right here. Woo.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you, Francesca. And thank you guys for hosting. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you. It was fun.
Fun.
All right. We'll see you later.
This is the
Bye.
longest minute ever.
Yeah. Till it's not. All right. See you later.
Bye. See y'all.
Guys, have a good night. Have a good weekend.
You too.